How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Ted. Really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation about my book and other things.
Great. Yeah, it looks like a very exciting book. I had a chance to glance at a few of the chapters, a lot of great information for people to learn more about the American dream and what do we do next in this extreme political arena.
It is that indeed. And I think that I've come to understand the book's role as a primer for both voters as well as policymakers and anyone running for office.
Yeah.
We assume that people know the answers to all these things about how government works, but there's so much that we don't know, you know?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's quite fascinating. I mean, even my personal experiences in running for school board, I learned so much. I thought I knew a lot about government, but the minute you actually get into that seat to run for political office, you learn such a great deal.
You do, and I wish you had made it. I hope you'll continue to try again in the future.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, so let's get to the main topic of our interview here. So tell us a little bit about the central message that you have in your book.
So the central message is that we have this ideal that has been a part of America from colonial times. It's called the American dream. And what that's really about is about economic and social mobility. And it's an issue that I've been concerned about for a long time. And you're aware of my background in economic development, so you know that that's a major vehicle for really trying to advance people, communities, and businesses. And so I felt that it was important to, if you will, put a meaningful integrating issue um, that is somewhere in the election set of discussions, and I think the American dream offers that. And I think if you will, the main character in the book is the American dream. It's not Donald Trump, and it's not Kamala Harris.
Mhm. All right, exactly. So tell us a little bit about your perspective on what the American dream is and what does it mean to people, the average citizen.
Well, I think for the average citizen, it's always been about them in their own way trying to pursue their hopes, their goals in life, and to do that as successfully as possible. It still has a great deal to do with prosperity and wealth building, and I think it always will. My desire is to see it still continue to be that. But I think what we need is to add something to that that really recognizes this whole broader realm of well-being. With your background, I keep thinking what a wonderful thing you did, when you complemented your business background, your engineering background with a PhD in psychology, recognition of people, their well-being, and everything that goes into that. And I think that we need that. We need that broader concept that brings into play not just that we're going to move ahead with a better house and a second or third car, and that we're going to continue to make more money every year, but that we have a sense of balance in our life. And that's reflected in people, communities, and businesses.
Mhm. So as somebody pursuing the American dream, what should they do with that?
Well, I think probably step back a bit and ask themselves the question, what is it that's most important to me in life? And what's most important to my family? And today we all see things happening that I certainly never saw when I was a child. The worst thing that ever happened in school was there would be a bully on the playground who would give you a black eye. Today, I wonder about our kids. I have a grandson who is starting first grade in Westerville schools, not far from you down in Columbus. I worry about him, to be honest with you. So safety is something we can no longer assume. So I think people need reassurances that we're going to be able to provide those fundamental things. There's a lot of disparities in terms of healthcare coverage, and so much more. Education, and all the debates on whether, and the two candidates have very different ideas. As Joe Biden does, as our current president, he reacted pretty strongly that we really need to take care of our public schools and our public system before we take care of church schools, as an example.
Great. Yeah, when I think about the American dream, and especially within education, coming here as an immigrant, I can definitely relate to that as a child coming here with nothing at 10 years old and going through the education system to reach in my version of what an American dream is and having the flexibility in time, as
Mhm,
well as success in job and everything else. So I think the American dream to some extent has different definitions depending on the individual, but
mhm.
it's the achievement of that and the means to get there. And then with
Yes.
our current political situation, what are the complexities that you see for people achieving the American dream?
Well, I'm going to start with the most obvious one, okay? We live in a society that's not so civil. People walk around with a great deal of angst. They're in emotional turmoil often. So that in many cases makes it very difficult to make good decisions about your career, about your kids, about yourself, about your own self-care. So that in itself is a huge thing. And I believe that that's something that we need to address as we think about this. But I have kind of a reflective perspective. If you really want to know what I think this is very much a personal quest, and it's a search for authentic identity, but being able to relate that to the American dream in a way that relates to who we are. And there's so many impediments now for average people. I look at the decline in manufacturing jobs over the years. That's how my father achieved the American dream, and my grandfather working on the railroad and working in the steel mills. So we've disrupted an awful lot of working lives by technology, and I'm a real fan of technology. But I believe that there's been some devastating effects on the manufacturing sector and the workforce. We're trying to remedy that, but I think it's still something that we really need to think about is what are the best pathways. And as I talk to people, I'm learning a great deal. I've been interviewed now 38 times since July 8th, which is gratifying and also speaks to the merit of Ross, my publicist. And I'll confess, okay, this is the first time I hired a publicist to really go out and get me earned media because it's not easy. And he's done an amazing job. But I've learned so much. This morning I was on a show with the female African American who has a long-standing program in Garland, Texas. It's just outside of Dallas, and she asked some very penetrating questions. She said, "Well, I had to struggle, but I didn't have to struggle as much as a lot of other African Americans did." She said, "I will tell you that I think it remains more difficult for women to achieve their dreams." And I worry about our choices. And one choice that we have in terms of president, and we'll try not to get too political in this whole discussion, but because I don't take sides in the book, but she's right. She's absolutely right. And you know what I said to her at the end? I said, I admire your courage. And you obviously have done it because she has a following of over 2 million people. She's really been successful. That's the American dream. And she has great communication skills and she knows how to do this. I love that. But I learned so much in every conversation.
Great. So it's great that you picked American Dream as a defining focus in your book. But let's connect it back to this election. What does it have to do with the current election?
Well, neither candidate has defined any kind of position, and they barely mentioned the American dream. Although Kamala Harris actually is on record, making several references to way back. I mean, when she started her political career. So I think she gets it, and she gets it in a what I would call a more inclusive way than Donald Trump does. There's a lot of things that I admire about Donald Trump. This is something you learn in writing a book, right? When you really want to treat people with fairness, and I try to be as fair as possible in how I assessed Donald Trump and in the book Joe Biden, because obviously things shifted, after the book was out. But he has been very successful. So the American dream for him has worked. It has.
Great. So when you look at the American dream, what are some major barriers for entrepreneurs and small business owners in achieving that American dream?
Well, I think they're the very things we've been talking about for a long time. And I think, first of all, for entrepreneurs, it's a supportive climate that encourages them. I was reading an interesting piece of research, and I'll share it very briefly with you because I don't want to get too far into it. But it was a study of the personality of place and the way that that influences entrepreneurship, and basically used the psychological, psychosocial, and cultural characteristics of places to be able to assess the potential for entrepreneurship. And, I've not gotten too deep into it, enough to know one thing, Ted, that this is an important topic when you think about entrepreneurship. So cultivating that environment, and I think we've done a lot. We talk about environmental ecosystems, the Kauffman Foundation, Jumpstart, the Ohio Fund, all these groups have obviously given recognition for a long time. Even business education, as you know, has given much greater attention to entrepreneurship. But it's the same things that the Council of Smaller Enterprises in Cleveland used to, work hard on, trying to minimize the influence of all the red tape that buries, these people starting businesses. But I think we also need to create an environment where the personal side of it comes out, where people know their strengths and weaknesses, and where they know how to manage people. Because a lot of businesses, as you know, are they're just not well managed, and there's a big learning curve that's associated with that. So that becomes a barrier. Access to capital. I haven't seen a survey that says that that it isn't at least one of the top three issues for businesses. But I think we've done a lot, and I think we need to continue to do more. So what do we need to do more of is we need to do a better job in minority entrepreneurship. I think we need to do a better job of empowering women and preparing them. But I think we've got a lot of people that never considered having a business, whether they live in Appalachia and they come out of a school system in Gallipolis or some other Southern Ohio town. They should know that that entrepreneurship is an opportunity for them to create their American dream, so that they don't have to think about going to work for the local power plant.
Right. So when you think about the pathways towards that American dream, what do you see as the major differences between Harris and Trump in their approaches to the American dream? And then you could dissect this into different aspects, from a community support aspect, from an educational aspect, from their own skills development aspect. What do they differ? How do you compare the two?
Well, I think Donald Trump follows the classic Republican model. Well, he follows a model of disruption. First of all, I don't think he really sees government as an institution as we've known. I think his approach to most things is to treat government and every aspect of it as a business. And we lose a lot of things when basically only the people that can afford to pay get service. And when you buy votes and you buy public policy because you have a lot of money. But I think his routine will continue to be, the tax cuts, continuing them for the wealthy. I think he's going to do, more on deregulation. I think he's going to continue to really try to, go along with, at least I think he's likely to go along with part of the Project 2025 agenda, which has to do with building in and disrupting systems, trying to get government, aligned with the conservative agenda. I think what Kamala Harris will do is in part reflected in what the Biden administration started. I think she's going to come down harder on issues that have to do with women's rights. I think she's going to come down harder on certain issues that really face systemic racism issue. And I think she's going to continue to use government programs as her apparatus to get things done. Now, I come on pretty strong as a moderate conservative in saying that, I really want to get this debt down. We have a 35 going on $36 trillion federal debt, and we have to get it down. It's a burden. And nobody has any control over spending. And so, but I think, my worry is that she's going to continue to do a lot of that. But I think she does have a greater interest in doing what I would call public-private partnerships and creating new vehicles to do things, and that's good. And working closer with education in partnership, working closer with state government in partnership, because all of those things, I think are really vital. I think Donald Trump is going to say the states have a right to basically define what they want to do. And, the federal government controls what it controls.
Okay, very interesting. So if you look at the level of control between the two candidates, which approach is better for the American dream, looking at the average American?
For the average American, I'd say that probably the platform that we see mostly from Biden and from Harris for the average person. But there's a lot of divided views on here. You look at the Donald Trump's base, you look at Kamala Harris's base. I mean, it's really mixed. I mean, there's some concentrations based upon, values, beliefs, faiths, and all these kinds of things. But, I think we need to find a way to get back to the middle. And I think we need to get back to a sense of moderation and balance in what we do. We need to moderate the role of government in our lives. I don't think that we want government dictating our religious faith and a lot of other things. I don't think that's right. And that's why I worry about, the role of different groups and how they unfairly increase policy outcomes, whether it's the Catholic Church, the evangelical Christian church, whether it's even education. Corporate lobby continues to be very strong. But I think, we have a political system that has been teetering on the brink for some time. This is not new. We've really been experiencing some really, really serious problems. The inability to do anything in a bipartisan way, and I think that's a fundamental failure. But hopefully, people can rally around the American dream and a vision of it that is inclusive enough and that can be personalized, as we started out with earlier talking about. But I think that's going to be a critical thing. We need that kind of thing that's going to bring us together.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because one of the stats that I saw that is in today's world, where 1% of the Americans hold 30% of nation's net wealth. That speaks highly to the amount of money that is out there and those people that are potentially in control with their respective powers, just from the wealth perspective. All right. So, in your book, you talked about the whole systemic political collapse. Share with us a little bit what you mean by systemic, because I have conversations with a lot of people all over the world about what a system is. Share with us what your perspective is on what systems are, and then apply that to the political system.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the values and beliefs. It has to do with the culture of government and governance. We've lost the whole concept of public service. I mean, it's rare when you find an elected official that's truly is dedicated to that. I dedicated my book to George Voinovich because I respected him as a public servant. And I worked with him. I worked with him on many levels. But I think we've basically lost that. I think so it's a cultural side of it that we need to transform, and the way that people see themselves in that system. And I think we need to continue to work on improving accountability and transparency. It's rare these days that we really see any kind of independent audits, and most federal agencies actually resist them. Whether you're talking from the Republicans or the Democrats, because they want to continue to work in an autonomous fashion and do what they what they seek to do. If it's environmental protection, if it's energy, if it's commerce. But I think that the cultural thing is really incredibly important. But if you had to ask me one thing, one way in, if you had to do it starting today, I would do the same thing that George Voinovich did, which is get control over how government operates. Everybody likes to be a policy wonk, but you know something? Policy changes, they have a lot of casualties and they have big learning curves. So when you think about trying to change the system, you have to understand how the system works. And when I think of the federal system, you know, I certainly think of the three branches, the executive, legislative, and judicial branch. And I think there's room for changing all. I happen to come out on the side that I think we need to limit the Supreme Court justices' terms. I mean, this is just ridiculous that this is a lifetime job. I don't favor that. Although I have some friends on the constitutional law side who said you don't quite get it and why it is the way it is. But I think we need to make those kind of changes. But we got to get control over how the federal government operates. So what Voinovich did when he became mayor of Cleveland, and then when he was first elected as governor, state of Ohio, he basically brought together task forces of business people, government, other government people, education. He had incredible teams of people that worked and systematically went through the various parts of state government and city government and really looked at how things functioned and put it to a test. And in 90 days, they came back with a plan that says, this is where we need to start in terms of really improving government so it works. So a sign that the federal government doesn't work, it's dysfunctional. It's not working. You know, I'm amazed. I don't know if you've ever taken the time. Don't do it. It's a waste of time. Always reading a lot of these annual reports of these different agencies. I mean, they got great PR firms. They really do. And I keep looking at, you know, the big metrics out there, and, you know, it's crazy. But I think we have to get back to a model of service, of public service that could revolutionize things. I think probably Vice President Harris is more likely to do that than Donald Trump would be. I'm being a little less balanced in our conversation today, mostly because I've been challenged. I've been on at least 5 very conservative radio stations all over the country, in Iowa and in California places. And oh my gosh, the questions I get there. Don, how could you even be fair to the Democratic Party? How could you even they're all about government. They're all about just trying to, you know, tax us and break us down and, you know, trying to tell us what to do. And so I've had a lot of interesting conversations from that standpoint. But it's operations, Ted. I think that's the starting point. There is a need for policy change. But as you know, systems are incredibly complex. And so you have to start somewhere. But I say in the book that we really need to follow the principles of systems planning and management and complex systems theory, of really looking at the emergent nature of outcomes and systems. That's in my book, and I provide guidelines on that. That's something that I'm going to say that I actually learned from you. And I think that's a great thing. And when you said, Don, can you teach this systems course, which I love, but I've learned a lot in the teaching of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you know, when I look at the political system as a whole in the US, one of the major challenges are the people going into the political system. You don't have to have certain credentials. You don't have to have certain skills. It's all about getting enough signatures to get on the ballot. Yes. Once you're on the ballot, then it's a popularity contest. And yes, there are people that will attack you from left or right, regardless of whatever camps they want to come from. But they will attack you just because you may not appear to be on their side. And people are getting into office without any credentials whatsoever.
Yes.
So it's quite fascinating to me of how the system has continued to be lasted this long. And yet there's no limited amount of checks and balances in the system as a whole on whether public servants are providing public service and doing something good for the system, for the community, as opposed to for their own individual desires or corporate interests.
I agree. And it is remarkable that we have managed to survive and things can move forward. But I think that is, you know, that is really the beauty of human beings. I think that it's almost miraculous every day they can get up and do what they do, even though they've got all these things that are on their minds, that they can move ahead to do it. But the weight of it, I think, is really, we saw this with COVID, which really kind of intensified a lot of the emotional and mental health struggles and all the things. And a lot of people won't even talk about that, Ted. I know you do, but a lot of people don't. I brought up the mental health issue, and it's interesting. A lot of the younger people, they say, we are struggling, and we're not sure really how to get out of this mindset that we have, and it's very much a reality for them. But a lot of people don't want to talk about it. It's because it's been stigmatized, and if you say that you're experiencing extreme duress, or it's beyond stress. Everybody's comfortable using the word stress. You notice that? I'm stressed out.
Yeah, it's kind of like a badge of honor these days. Everybody wants to use stress as an excuse to not do something or to do something.
I know. I know. But how many people do you hear saying I'm crazy?
Yeah. Yeah. In a way, we should all be crazy to some controlled extent so
I
that the
know.
crazy can drive the innovations that makes the world a better place.
Yes. Yes. But I think, I'll tell you, my interests in entrepreneurship have grown. And this is something that you and I can talk about separately because, um, you know, I think it's just incredibly important. And I think we need to do even more. Until I wrote my personal memoir, I didn't really understand how many entrepreneurs were in my family because we never knew them as entrepreneurs. They were just small business owners, right? My uncle Eddie, as we called him on my mother's side, he had three businesses going at the same time. He started out selling sewing machines, and then he moved to vacuum cleaners. And then he started selling all kinds of other accessories and things. And at Christmas time, he started a Christmas tree, business. He was selling them, in the alley of where he had a shop. But he made his living doing who knows how many things. I can at least think of six things that Uncle Eddie did. And my Uncle Ed, on the other side, my dad's brother, he and his wife Joy started an incredibly successful carpet business on Westheimer Boulevard in Houston, Texas, back in the late 1950s. And everybody said, you'll never be able to sell carpet. You'll never be able to do this, Ed and Joy. Do you know what they achieved? They opened up within, I'd say, probably 15 years they were in business. They had like 25% of their business in Mexico and South America. It's just incredible.
Mhm.
And they did that through relationships and because they learned to be good business managers. But I never realized and how many of my relatives and I never thought about it, how many of them had businesses on the side. They had full-time jobs, but they had businesses on the side. You can
Yeah.
say out of necessity, but that too is their American dream. You would never talk my two Uncle Eds out of being business owners. Never.
Mhm. Yeah. And this reminds me a lot of my own role model and Ben Franklin as a man of many hats. And just you don't have to be tied to one employer, one job, one role. You can do many, many different aspects of what your passions are, what your expertise are. And there are people all over the world. And one of the beauties in being an American that I find all the time is whenever you look at the global landscape, we have such respect from so many different other countries that we can easily sell our expertise to many countries that we didn't even think about. Every single American can do some extent of that, everything from basic English writing to different products and goods and services that we can provide. There are so many opportunities out there. So, but this requires a mindset shift towards understanding I don't have to be just an employee working 9 to 5 because I need health insurance or I need this, right? And you need that steady paycheck versus the American dream where you want to take that big risk. How do you get people to take that big risk? And what does that have to do with the political system? What does that have to do with the current election?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with it. I mean, I interviewed. So there's I'm trying to remember their first names. Bruce and Ellen were Ohio State University graduates. One of your places of education, alma maters. And I talked to them about the fact that they graduated, and a friend introduced me. So that's how I got in touch with them. But their student debt was about combined $125,000. And their projection when they could buy a house is it would take at least 5 years. They both have jobs and they're doing well. I think they're probably struggling that, they're not moving along fast enough, but, they get really discouraged, and it's the weight of things. And they were both emphatic. They did not want to move in with their parents. They could have, but that's not something they wanted to do. They wanted to be on their own. And I think that they'll be successful. For some reason, they really hit a good place in my heart. But these are real stories. I mean, people are struggling, and the student debt thing is a real issue. Should we bail all these students' debt? I don't think we can afford to do that, but I think we could probably help a lot in that area. But I get asked the question, does everybody need a 4-year college degree, Don? And I say, well, depends on what you want to do in life. What's your goals? And they say, well, do you mean that's just kind of that's an entrance requirement for us? And I said, for a lot of jobs, it is. And they said, well, do I really need that education? And I said, you mean to perform the job? Maybe not. But how about having an educated mind and being a well-educated citizen who knows how to think in a logical way that is emotionally intelligent? I said, I think that's what education is fundamentally about. And yes, it is training, but I think we have to get that part of it down and not just look at college degrees as stepping stones to get the job or do whatever we want to do. Right. You might disagree with me on this. I'd be interested in your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think it's unique to the individual, but on the fascinating topic of the student debt situation and the political views of it, I find it quite fascinating that every political party, every political individual has this opinion on who pays for the current student debt, whether it's individual, whether it's bailed out and so forth. But I think they missed the point. Why is it that people have to take out these loans, that their financial literacy isn't strong enough so that they don't have this debt going to a university education? Yes. I remember going through my first education in Ohio State, through mechanical engineering. I don't have anything. There was no way my parents can afford it. I worked 3 jobs, made sure I graduated OSU after, just a little over 4 years with 0 debt. And the only time I had to take on debt was in my doctorate program. So, and this happens in the same time with, healthcare systems and all that. Everybody complains about who pays for it. Nobody looks at it. How do we prevent the situation from happening?
You're absolutely right.
If people are healthier, we don't need to worry that much about healthcare. If we actually develop our youth to be more financially literate, they can actually graduate from college or whatever educational institution they have without a huge level of student debt that they have to worry about, and that they have to carry on their backs for decades on. So
absolutely.
When you look at the whole American dream concept and what the political environment has to do with it, how do we get people towards a mentality where we start looking at the root cause as opposed to spend millions and billions of dollars fighting over how do we put a Band-Aid on the end outcome versus focusing on the root cause that maybe in the future, all of our children are financially literate enough that we don't have to worry about their student debt because they know how to make the right decisions.
Yes. I share that frustration. And I also, when I look at problems, I try to find out what's really the cause that really moves things, call it the root cause. But I think that that's really a critical thing. But, we're so far from that. So I will tell a short story. When I was working in Cleveland, I was working for the Greater Cleveland Growth Association at the time. And this was the time when Lee Iacocca went to the federal government and got this loan package that they called it the bailout package for Chrysler. And, relative to other things that we've invested, where the government's invested money, that one worked. But I was, because I, at that time, specialized in the automotive industry. That was my economic development specialty, was industry focused. And so I spent 3 years working with automotive industry suppliers to help sort out all the changes they thought were initially back-to-back recessions. It turned out had to do with the impact of all the new environmental energy regulations and foreign competition. To be specific, they were mostly being impacted by the Japanese at that point, but it was they were blindsided. They were blindsided. They really didn't understand what was happening. But I think that I think that we need to change how we think about things. So it's just like you get people past the fact of thinking that it's just the recessions that cause all these problems for these companies, but it's something a lot deeper. And one of the big things, and I know that you're definitely so well versed in this area, given, and you're back from where, Thailand?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. You're over there teaching what, business students?
Yes.
That's pretty darn cool. So you get it. So I wouldn't ever want to see anything in the world to stop you from doing that. Or if I decided to go, to work for the European Union and provide some kind of consultative advice on economic development and business strategy, that I couldn't do that. But I worry that, as we tighten down the borders and we start talking about, more of a nationalistic approach to things, that, it's going to prevent a lot of these wonderful things from happening, so that we don't grow up as global citizens, that we don't have the level of awareness and sensitivity, culturally and otherwise, that you do when people are out exploring these things. That worries me a great deal. And, I'm going to say something about the whole reshoring movement. And I had an interview about reshoring last week. And I think it's a good thing. I think for national security reasons, we need to have certain capacity to produce. And I mean, you're well aware of the Intel situation in the Columbus area and all the other things that are going on in terms of really making sure that our strategic industry capacity is sufficient here. But at the same time, I keep thinking in economics, this thing that all of us were taught about comparative advantage. What about trade? Are we just going to set that aside and say, oh, well, we can produce everything we need? I don't think we can. And I think we run the danger of actually cutting ourselves off from innovation. I read these reports that come out daily about artificial intelligence, what's happening in China, right? And what's happening elsewhere in the world. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Do we want to just, close our doors and say, okay, we're not going to bring students in from China. We're not going to bring students in from other nations to study here, because we need that talent. If you wanted to look at it from sort of a selfish US of A perspective, we need that talent. So those things really worry me, because I think we're already too insular.
Yeah. One thing I would love to see the US do, and it's already been, I think, mathematically calculated, if we get at least half or a large percentage of our foreign students to stay here and work like they do in Singapore.
Yes.
In Singapore, they offer them that education, and then they have to stay there for 2 years at least, if not more.
Yes.
And when these graduates of these foreign countries come, regardless of which country it is, when the best talent of those countries come to the United States, and then we keep them after they graduate, we give them jobs, we give them something, they can help pay down our national debt. But
Absolutely.
from an innovation perspective, their different life experiences can bring such a wealth of innovation that could really help us continue to be number one in the world, no matter what happens. And it's
I agree.
we have that basic foundation, but the policies that drive it needs to also to support that as well, so that we continue to absorb the best knowledge anywhere from the world to bring it back to the US. And whether we develop them partially in our universities or whether they come into different realms, it's that innovation that drives the US. That's the core of what America is all about.
It is. Yes, it is. But I think we're coming to, I think it was David Hallstrom that wrote the book, Reckoning. And I think there's a day of reckoning that faces all of us, especially when we continue, and I'll use the term operate, because we're earlier, I said, I think we've got to get control over how government operates. But, I think that, if we continue to operate the way we are and continue to mortgage our future and continue to not pay attention to the costs of the federal debt, which means we're going to have to make cuts, or we're going to have to find new revenue sources, or a mix of the two. And that's kind of an unpleasant conversation for anybody, because everybody wants their piece of the federal budget. So take somebody else's. And, we've got those who say, well, not at any cost, we cannot afford to cut the defense budget. It's interesting. And here's a real world way that Don learns things. Okay. there's a group on LinkedIn that's called the intelligence community. You ought to listen in if you're not into that group. And I just listen to what is being talked about. It's like, wow. Because, first of all, there is a broad perspective. There are people that take sides on what is good, what's not good for America. What is intelligence? I mean, there's really quite a debate about that, especially in this age of disinformation, misinformation, So, I think we have to be very careful. I think actually we need to be more scientific. That's what I think. And, be careful what we believe. So when we talk about the American dream, let's recognize that it isn't ideal. And you said it just the way I see it, which is it's something that is individual. It's unique to the person. So that means the government cannot prescribe that. But I think the biggest worry is, are we going to lose this precious foundation that we have of freedom, democracy, being a republic? Are we going to lose that? Are we going to lapse into an authoritarian or semi-authoritarian state? There's a lot of reasons to be concerned about that.
Yeah.
And I really think that that's what is most likely to undermine the American dream. But when you're ready, I want to share an idea with you but I want you to ask your questions. Go ahead, and I've got an idea I want to share with you.
Okay, feel free, because we're kind of running out of time here. So I want to
Okay.
make sure that you get the chance to share and plug in for your book.
So the specific thing that I'd like to see out of this book is that we could get bipartisan legislation in place, whoever the next president is. And it would focus on advancing the American dream. And it wouldn't involve, increasing the federal budget to do it, but we would systematically go through the programs we have and align these programs and ask the question, how do these things really contribute to social, economic mobility? And we think in three levels that we started out. This is people, it's communities, education as a part of that, and it's business. And I think we'd find that there's a lot of things that we don't need, or we're going to use them differently. If it's in the Small Business Administration, the Department of Commerce, if it's in the Energy Department, there's just a lot of things that need to be aligned, and we need to think in a more integrated systems way about the role of the federal government in advancing the American dream. I think somehow we need a new set of metrics. And I used in the book, I used real per capita personal income, and I adjusted that for cost of living. And I did it at the state level just because I didn't want it to occupy too much of the book. But truly, we need to think about things in real financial terms. For years, economic developers have promoted their states and areas as being low-cost places to do business. Yeah, fine. So what kind of industries are you going to attract if you do that? They're not the innovation industries that you're talking about, that's for sure. Or that real per capita income in and of itself is a valid measure. But by adjusting it, which state came out number one? It was North Dakota. It's really kind of an interesting, so where does whatever you make go the farthest? And that's this point in time. Is that going to happen 5 years from now? I don't know. But I'm intrigued by that concept because it forces us into a financial and economic mindset to really think about these problems, and we need more of that. Mm-hmm. But evidence-based government, evidence-based public policy, we talk it, but we don't do it. We don't adopt policies on that basis.
As we kind of wrap up this interview here, and as well as your book, I think that would be wonderful for any politician, whoever becomes the president and whichever government it is, to adopt the American dream as a focal point for a lot of different policies. And even for, who knows, somebody might pick this up, but, as a campaign slogan, right? Advancing
Yes.
the American dream,
Yes.
reviving the American dream. That would be really wonderful to have as a focus. So thank you
I
very much
appreciate you
for,
saying that. Thank you.
yeah, thank you very much for your time and all the efforts that goes into writing a book. It's not easy. It takes months and months of research and writing and
It
reflection.
does.
It is very, very challenging, especially on a topic like this. So thank you very much for publishing such an incredible book, and I wish you the best of success.
Thanks, Ted. Appreciate that very much.
Okay. Thank you, Don.